Hey there, are you considering 3D printing as a hobby but don't know where to get started and don't know if it's for you? In this video, I'm going to go through a few of my decision points and why I've been super happy with my decision to get into 3D printing. Even in the last few years, 3D printers have gotten so affordable that there's now even having them in almost every school you go to. I think 3D printing is incredibly fascinating, and I have found it a really great hobby and creative outlet. You got stuff like this, so it's a doorstop, and it looks like the word stop, which is fun. And I'll go through how I made a little hanger for these doorstops, and I used CAD, and then got some calipers out, and was able to create something you can hold up with 3M strips, which is kind of fun. Other kind of things you can print are, this is a coaster, and this is infill, so this is a geometric pattern that you can choose to put inside of your 3D prints so that they can save on weight. Because if you're going to print something and it's going to be completely solid, that's going to use a lot of filament, and frankly, unless it needs to be mechanically sound, just be extra cost and weight for no reason. The reason I originally got into 3D printing was to build racing drone parts. At the time, I was very into racing drones, and the only issue with racing drones is when they're going so fast, the ones that I was starting to build were going above 150 kilometers per hour. When they crash, they don't usually come out unscathed. We'll say it like that. Usually you break a lot of stuff all the time, and it basically was a consistent parts ordering money pit. Now, while I enjoy drones, I have found 3D printing much more approachable in that once you buy the initial printer, the costs, at least for the plastic one, the FDM one, are relatively negligible. And I also would say that the more you spend up front on the printer, the less putzing around you have to do with it. So if you spend a whole bunch of money and get a professional level one, you probably don't need to screw around with the settings ever. But if you buy a cheap $200 or $300 one, expect to spend a lot more time fussing around. So I ended up going with the Prusa Mark III. Well, now I've upgraded it to a Mark III's using some of the things they put out. And you can kind of print these printers with the printer. Obviously not the mechanical or electrical parts, but all the plastic parts in the printer are printed with the printer. So it's an incredibly interesting bootstrapping thing. So you could make your printer pay for itself. I don't tend to do that, but if you're considering 3D printing, one of the cool things you can do is you can start sending your designs off and have someone else 3D print it. So that's a very approachable way for you to consider, or if you have a child or someone else around you that's considering 3D printing but they don't know where to start, there's a whole bunch of different services, depending on where you are in the world, that will do your prints for you in a variety of different materials. I know there's one near me where I am here, and I was considering it before I bought my resin printer, and it turned out the resin printer was just affordable. It was on a really deep sale. I don't even remember what holiday it was, but the resin printer, I ended up purchasing it for like 70% off or something because they had just released a new model, and I was happy with the old one. So we go from your plastic-based FDM printers, or fused deposition modeling, to a resin type printer. And a resin there's a variety of different type of resin printers. The one that I use, it's called an Anycubic Photon Mono X, and the way that it works is it has a build plate and a UV lamp with a screen that blocks out parts you don't want the goo or the resin to cure. So over time, if you did a time lapse, you actually look like you're pulling this new object out of a vat of goo. And the very cool thing with this type of printer is the resolution you can get with it is pretty astounding. So mine, that I haven't even tuned to try to get to the pinnacle of how accurate it can get, is at 0.05 millimeters, which is quite thin and would be very challenging to try to do. So 0.05 millimeters, which would be very challenging to do on an FDM printer. I tend to have problems once I get below 0.15 on my FDM printer. just because you're getting into such small, everything is so small, and the way that the FDM works, it builds off of previous layers, and it just turns into a challenge to try to get things to come out and look good. So I'm an electrical engineer, and one of the things I like to use my 3D printers for is for making project enclosures or making things that are for projects that I'm building. So I made a sous vide controller several years ago where I 3D print the enclosure for a PID controller, which then controls a slow cooker. And that's how I make my lunch every week. So it's quite cool. And it's kind of something that now that I have the printer, the ongoing costs, it's just really just power to run the thing. And a kilo of filament, depending on how much you're printing and how heavy the things you're printing are, it's not very expensive. So it's a pretty affordable hobby unless you're printing massive objects. So I'm going to go over how I created a little hanger for these door stops, and we're going to get into it over here. We're going to go over and start looking at Fusion 360.
This is what the finished stop hook looks like. So it's a pretty simple design. You can kind of see down here in the bottom left all the steps that we took. So very simple. Got the calipers out, measured how big of a base plate I want to accommodate the 3M strips and still be able to pull them off the wall when we're done. So you do a sketch, do a little extrusion. So the extrusion gets us to here. And then we do another sketch, which was sketching the little post so it can go through the little hole in the S here. So there we go. That sketch is finished. And then did an extrusion. And then we added a little bit more to it for the hook, so the hook aspect of it. And then did a fillet at the end to just kind of round things off. So this is what it looks like. And a really cool thing, if you just look up here, so it starts here in solids when you're working on things, and then in utilities, you can go in and make 3D print. So the file that we want, which is the next step in the process, is the STL. So you can go in here and you can see, here's just a link. I don't know what this website is. I won't really condone it, but Fusion 360 is saying, hey, look, you can get a quote for what this would cost to print directly in Fusion 360, which is quite cool. So we take the STL from here, and we're going to get into, this is what the Prusa version of Slicer, which is an open source 3D printer slicer tool, is. And you can see I've put one of these on the build plate. This is what the build plate looks like. And I've told it over here, the layer settings, what type of filament, which changes the temperatures that the printer prints at, and the printer. So you go through and you slice. And this is quite cool because this actually will show you layer by layer what it looks like. So this is what the slicer, this is what at least the Prusa version of the slicer looks like. And if you want to make more of them, you just push the plus button. You can ask it to lay them out for you. And then again, you just slice it. And that's what it looks like. And this spits out something called G-code. You can see this down in the bottom right here. And G-code is something that will go and get spit into, you can use an SD card. I actually have a Raspberry Pi running Octoprint, which is a little more sophisticated than using an SD card. And all you have to do is drag the file here. I'll see it's upset because I'm overriding it. So we'll just let it override it. That's cool. And then you can go in here, you can warm the printer up. And this gets into my specific printer workflow. So you can tell it to go, okay, I want to warm the tool up to 225 for ABS and 100. And it will start doing that. And you can control it and kind of watch watch what it's doing right here from the web interface. It's quite cool.
There's just a few reasons why I chose 3D printers as a hobby, and maybe that will help you make your decision too if you haven't gone down this path yet. If you're into learning how to be a more social engineer or technical person, check out my link in the description below and join my social engineer network. I hope to see you there.